Yes, sir.
All right. Would you prefer if somebody had a cow dog to have them just stay away from the calves if they're not used to it, or are cow dogs helpful or hurtful loading trailers? Or what would your preference be?
It's kind of like talking about somebody's kids now. I prefer dogs not to be around the loadout or a processing area, because they will teach cattle to kick by biting their heels. And if I'm the one working and palpating and doing anything behind the cow and the dog's been biting them, they're going to kick me. So I do not let a dog work around the chute. I like dogs in gathering situations and bringing cattle to you. I don't want a dog that's always wanting to bite something. And that's something everybody just brags about, their dogs like to bite. I want one of them that can train an animal to move. They may have to nip them, to get that respect because they're smaller. But if you got one that's biting all the time, that's not good. Yeah, and it was interesting. We do quite a few of these trainings, and we have somebody doing dog work, and we do either horse on foot. That's actually how all these started, Renee, when it was Joel Helm doing on foot and Charlie Trayer doing it with dogs, and Kurt was on horseback. What we find is, and I've done quite a few with Charlie after that, and he hates going after me because he can't show how to dog break cows. Because once you do the things we're talking about here, the cows work the dogs very easy too. So you don't have to dog train cattle. It's basically the same principles. And it was interesting. He didn't have near as much to show when he followed me, so he liked going in front so he could have the chance to train on them. So it's basically training the same things whether you're using dogs or not. But I like a dog that will bring cattle to me, and I can stay in front and do the control and open the gates and lead them forward and just let the dogs bring them. But once they get in the pens, if you got cattle moving, having one here that could actually control and help, no problem with that. What I find, a lot of dogs make way too big of moves. They're really good at fixing them, but they also create problems they got to fix. So getting one of them that really just does what he needs to do is the tough part. But I love dogs, but getting one of them that does the way they're supposed to, just like the rest of us, there's good and bad in every crowd. Yes?
In handling dairy scares, would you have any adjustments that you would make in what you showed us today?
No, ma'am. Dairy cattle draw a lot better than beef cattle and work from the front better. They're so curious. That's one thing that frustrates everybody that tries to work dairy cattle. They want to push them, and the dairy cattle don't want to come to them. And I don't know why we just keep pushing when they'd rather us set them up to go forward. Our cowboys in the panhandle, they just can't hardly make the transition. That's something else. In the feeding pens, I talked about always letting the cattle come by you. And for some reason, we empty feedlot pens, we want to go behind the cattle and push them out of the pen. That's an ideal situation to let those cattle come to you and flow out of the gate. Holsteins empty so easy if you'll stay at the gate. If you go behind them, about half of them will come back there and visit. And a lot of the beef cattle will start running circles because they don't know what you're doing either. So if you can sit there at the front, just like we did getting the alley loaded to go to the trailer, get those first two to go, and the rest of them will just flush like a toilet. That may not be the best analogy, but it works. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am. All right, we got another one over here, and then we'll get to you.
Okay, so with your loadouts, in order to eliminate that space between the trailer and your chute, and/or eliminate damage to your trailer and the chutes from truck drivers backing into it too fast, would you recommend putting a rubber bumper?
If you're going to maintain the rubber bumpers, yes. What I see, a lot of people put rubber bumpers on there and then they'll wear out and they've got holes on one side and then they can't close it off because either the truck bumper or the chute bumper is broken. What I actually like on the front of a loading chute are those plates that will shift. So even if the truck's not square, it will shift just enough to make it's always flush. Those are my ideal. They don't have to be spring loaded. I've actually got a portable chute that has just got a big bolt in the middle of the plate. And the plate sticks out just an inch or two in front of the chute. And so when you bump it, it'll shift just a little bit. And you rarely have to reposition the truck on it. So even on a simple chute, you can do something like that to make it always flush. Good question. Yes, ma'am.
So we use horses to gather our cows and bring them in and do some work in pens with horses, but a lot of what we do in terms of putting them through like the bud box and the sweeps and things like that is on foot. How does being on horseback and the actual working pens change what you do? Because I kind of feel like my footprint's a lot bigger on a horse than on foot, and I'm trying to figure out how to adjust what I'm doing on horseback so that it works still.
You're absolutely correct. And I didn't talk about it. I should have talked about that from the start. I love working cattle horseback. I'm old, fat, and crippled. I love horses, okay? When you have artificial joints, it helps to be up and let somebody else do the walking. I love doing just what you talked about, using horses outside. It does give you a bigger presence. And I started to say this earlier when I was loading the cattle. When you get up higher, it puts more pressure on cattle. So when those cattle weren't turning around in the alleyway, my next move was to step up. And it's amazing how much difference that changes the pressure. And so when you're on a horse, you've got the presence of the horse, yourself, and then you can move his head to put pressure. So they're a great tool. That's why horses are so effective at handling cattle, is because they have a bigger presence. You can pay attention to the cattle and not have to watch where you're walking. And you don't have to watch all those little intricacies, and they can help you find cattle in the brush and everything else. I much prefer to work cattle horseback because it's just it's another set of eyes and ears and feet. What you do need to have them where they'll stop, stay straight, back up, side pass one way or another, so you've got control on them. I don't want one jumping and cutting horse action on a cow. That creates too much response. So that's something that, just like myself, going in straight, back out straight, reposition. So the horse deal is a bigger presence, but it's normally a better presence than just somebody on foot. And so you can actually project pressure on the other side of a group of cattle because you're up high. So I really like using horses to do that. The other thing is ATVs, and I know a lot of you probably use ATVs. ATVs are normally used to pull cattle, but you can use them to drive or be behind them, kind of working like a dog. I prefer to actually work behind the cattle more with an ATV to get them started. You mentioned cow-calf pairs. If you go out with an ATV, if they're used to coming to it, it's somewhat of a problem because then you want to try to get them to go away from it, right? But if you go out in with cow-calf pairs with an ATV or even horseback, you might get off behind the cattle opposite where you want them to go and just lope circles, and the cows will start getting their calves and start drifting and taking off that pressure. Just like these calves, when I went in the pen, they all got up and went to the other side. So you can let that start your movement of those pairs, and then use your ATV to keep it going. The problem with an ATV is you don't have as much tight control on it as a horse or on foot. Because you made the comment, you can't turn one around as quick as you can a horse or on foot. And this one kid that did motocross stuff says, yeah, you can. She showed me how to stand up on the front of one and you can flip one around almost immediately. I'm not that agile. But a lot of times, it's noise as well, and cattle don't know what to respond to. So sometimes you have to get off one of them if you want to be precise. So I actually use an ATV a lot, but when I get down to a certain point, I may have to step off of it and get the cattle to go through a gate, and then I can come back and get on the ATV. This is something else that a friend of mine was rotating cattle all the time, and he'd go out on his ATV, so the cattle came to him all the time. So when he wanted to work them and push them with the ATV, that didn't work. They'd always turn and come to him. So I told him about a guy I knew that trained his cattle. When he was going to rotate, he'd blow a whistle, like a coach's whistle, and the cattle would then know it was time to rotate. And I thought that's what he'd do. But later I found out when they go to work the cattle and they're not going to rotate, he blows the whistle. And the cows then know it's something different. They're not going to rotate pastures. They're going to have to go away from him. So they don't use it for a lot of racket. It's just their signal that, nope, we're not rotating. This is something different. And he said those cows trained to that in 2 days. And so when he shows up on his ATV, blows his whistle, the cows will all kind of start turning and going, and he can drive them. So you may think about some kind of signal like that. He said the biggest problem he had was his dad liked to blow the whistle. And so you may want to have a limit on how many whistles you can blow in a day. Any other questions or comments?